I'm making a video. Tired, but I'm going to do it. Response video to Matt. Hopefully they did a video on consciousness, and I want to get to that too, but yeah, I don't think it's good to do both of them together. I mean, this does bring up a lot of different kinds of subjects, so I might take it in a different direction, but we'll see how it goes. So Matt's basic, this, you know, I didn't play the second half of the video. I just got to this point where he starts saying things that are relevant to me. And, you know, the preface of the video is just a discussion about he had listened to a conversation between me and Despook, and over the concept of this, you know, that language is, you know, my contention is that our language is crude, archaic. It's like it's got a lot of appendixes in it. It's got a lot of pieces in it that are ignorant, because we didn't understand how things happen, so we labeled them wrong. We misunderstood the function. And so some of our words are inaccurate. It's like the Benjamin Franklin thing of, you know, putting the plus and minus signs on the wrong ends of the battery wires. Yeah, you had a 50-50 chance of getting it right, and you got it wrong in terms of which way the stuff flows. And so yeah, there's constructs, there's little brokennesses in our language, and in those brokennesses is room for miscommunication and for saying things we don't intend to say. Yeah, it's just very imprecise and loaded with meaningless words. Love, happy, I mean, go down the list of all the silly words in our language. But certainly as a scientific language, as a language for describing things carefully and explicitly, it's dangerous to say the least. Yeah.
He seems to want to do, you know, like to fix the definition of every word so that it would refer unambiguously to an object or a mechanical process in the world. I think that's it's a very strange form of theology, really.
No, so his claim by saying something like, you know, evolution would have a definition. The only evolution we would use the word evolution for, let's say, biological evolution, we'd have one word. It meant biological evolution. It meant it under the circumstances of a DNA molecule that becomes a blueprint and is read by chemistry and constructs a copy. It constructs a machine through that process, and that the fact is the blueprint evolves. We don't evolve. The blueprint, the DNA molecule, is changing, not us per se. The egg to the chicken versus the egg argument is the change first takes place in the DNA molecule. That's the origins of our advancement. Molecules are evolving, not us, but they're evolving through this puppet show. They're changing how they are based on how the puppet performs, the machine that they produce. So this is an explicit thing happening. This is the source of our existence, is this process of evolution, and an explicit scientific description of that process won't have any room for magical thinking and magical beliefs. It will explain explicitly and diagram with accurate terminology, not silly words like love, what we're doing, why a certain attribute we have was functional to our survival, and why we might have some functionality that's now archaic, like an appendix, that doesn't have any use, maybe even our level of aggression. Maybe certain psychological phenomena inside of us are just quite hostile to what we're achieving now, which is civilization, an ordered, sustainable, functional civilization. That maybe we have many functionalities, many old archaic tools built into our physiology through that biological process, through that natural selection process, that's not really compatible with this civilization selection process, and that the organism we are now is not an organism suited for the environment we're living in. This would be a scientific, a logical, an explicit, a sensible dissection of what we are. And there'd be no room for witches and magic and goblins and all the notions of the past, Scientology and astrology and all kinds of silly concepts that have no meaning anymore. They have no relevance or substantiation or credibility. They're incredible theories of truth now. The facts have proven them incredible. To believe the earth is flat would be an incredible belief. It would have no credibility. It has no credibility. It's over. And the notion of that we are anything but tool-enabled battle bots created through 4 billion years of gladiator warring is a fact, Matt. That's the science. That's the truth of it. And so yes, there's no room for your whatever. You want to make something out of something. You want to say there's a poofer somewhere, some little magic force that's intending or trying or manipulating. There's no evidence for it. All the evidence points to the absence of such a force. But there is no manifest destiny. There's no bigger plan. There's evolution. We exist because our ancestors fought a harder fight. And we're lucky. Circumstantially. That's it. There's nothing else to it.
It's the idea that there is this God's eye perspective and that God is like the perfect calculator.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely nothing like that. I claim nothing like that. I claim the facts create perspective. I claim that information informs us, empowers us to do things, to predict all kinds of things. We don't need quantum mechanics. I bet you there was no quantum mechanics applied in going to the moon. I bet you there wasn't. I bet you not one element of the moon landing required quantum mechanics.
A sort of mathematical God. This is a kind of deism. It's a very...
So let's just understand. He's calling it deism to accept that we have come from animals living in the weeds and in the bush, okay, and we have acquired our knowledge through a linear acquisition, where we compound and build on top of these knowledge. And in a sense, that knowledge can grow, in a sense, very quickly when it gets to certain levels. And so we had the industrial age, and we became very mechanical. We became very knowledgeable of the mechanics of systems. We understood the world as systems, weather systems, economic systems, and we started refining and fine-tuning everything from car engines to toasters to escalators to elevators, everything. We engineered all of it to gain higher efficiencies and more practicality, to make it lighter and smaller and more practical and more efficient. And that's a kind of growth. And I'm not saying that's in my opinion an unsustainable growth. You can only do so much with a vibrating dildo. There's only so many features you could put into it, and eventually it's done all it can do. It can't do it any better. And we've reached that limit in much of our technology, where now the technology is more obnoxious than practical. The phone is now just some sort of annoying thing that tells you how good you look today, or some other bullshit. Whether your shoe is untied, and of course tries to sell you something all day long. So I'm just saying there is a limit to this function of gaining the most efficiency out of our lives, the most joy possible. That kind of idea. There are limits to how that can work, especially limits in a world that is capitalistic and it doesn't understand the value of the individual consciousness. and has no value for it. So we could agree that in that sense the system has failed dismally. But I would argue it's failed dismally not because we stepped beyond our nature, but because we lived up exactly to our nature. We did no better than our nature.
Very classical understanding of science, a sort of Cartesian or Newtonian understanding of science, and I think it's just been very convincingly proven and shown.
So this is the statement made by a lot of these phantasmagoricals who claim a knowledge of science, and it's really annoying, because I wish Einstein could have invented eternal life or something, just so he could be around to say, "Shut up, you loser." I mean, this is such bullshit. All right, you're hanging so much on quantum theory, not quantum mechanics, but theories, physical theories and models that are abstract and just entirely made up to fit the circumstances. You're just putting like Daffy Duck fake footprints, on the murder scene, and then saying, "Look, Daffy Duck did it." And yeah, I can't prove Daffy Duck didn't do it. Okay, yeah, I can't prove that Daffy Duck doesn't exist. But he doesn't exist. You did just contrive the murder scene. You contrived the facts. You contrived the circumstantial connection. And there is none. There's no connection between biological evolution and quantum theory. There's no connection between most of Newton's statements about how the universe works and any catch that unravels it all. No, it's all good science. It's all good definitions of how things work. And in a sense, he was so much better than he's given credit for when you think about the fact that he had already found out that there were questions that he couldn't quite access. I mean, to think that a guy back then was smart enough to put layers of glass together and figure out that how much of the light was reflecting, and figure out that there's these weird percentage arrangements, that the glass is a certain thickness and the light is a certain frequency, that you have this bizarre circumstance where twice as much light reflects. I mean, this is he was already acknowledging that there were phenomenon in the mechanics that he couldn't account for. But that doesn't mean he thought, or doesn't mean Einstein thought, or mean anybody should think that there's magic. It's not a magical reason. And so he's saying there's decisive proof because they did a 2-slit experiment. And once again, you've got to understand this experiment is a contrivance. It's contrived to create the result. All right? It's not, is it just happenstance that when you have a generator of a photon that's a mile away from a target, that somehow you're going to create some irregularity when you filtered it twice before it even gets to the target? Why do you have to filter the light twice? Why do you have to do that? Why do you have to have a gun that can't shoot straight? Oh, that's right, that's the only time the photon goes through both slits. If you aim the gun and shoot it through one of the slits, well, then somehow it can't go through both slits. But if you don't aim and close your eyes and do this, somehow it can go through 2 slits. Now, logic says there's a reason why there's a difference in the result, and the reason isn't phantasmagorical, the reason isn't God, okay? The reason is because there is a mechanics to it, and all you have to do is understand the mechanics. And so when you look at any of these experiments that create quantum effects, you can see that built into the experiment are filters. There are transitions where photons are being converted into electrons, and then electrons are emitting new photons. And once you do that, once you put something through a few translations, you will change its destiny. You will make it irregular just from the fact that you can't trace the effects, and that there's a time difference. If you have a child in 2001 and you have a child in 2014, those two children are not going to look alike, are they? No, they're going to look very different, because one's going to be really tall and one's going to be really small. And the same is true when you're creating photons. We already know that photons have a character. Everybody talks about them like they're all the same fish. They're exactly this, and they don't do anything else but this, and they have no other feature but this. But of course they do, because the light can be polarized. Obviously it has a shape. Obviously it's performing in some way. And that when you filter those performers out, you'll get a different result at the end. So this whole thing is about filtering. And that's what the two-slit experiment does 3 times. It creates 3 different filters to get to the target. And then you're surprised that the result isn't what you would expect. Well, yeah, you filtered it 3 times. You first filter it for the fat. You took all the fat guys out. And then you took all the tall guys out. And then you took all the guys with sneakers on out. And so you are surprised that at the end you have a filtered end product. Well, of course you do. Because you created filters. Now, I didn't want to get into the physics, but he's going to bring it up. And this is what he's really talking. He thinks quantum, okay, has some relevance. Quantum mechanics has some relevance to biological evolution, to the struggle for survival for DNA molecules. That it is somehow affecting that destiny. That somehow it was quantum that figured out Tyrannosaurus was a bad idea, and maybe we should go with sensitive human instead. So it wasn't a meteor, okay, caused by billions of years of meteoritic activity in the universe, a cascade of rocks bouncing into each other for millions of years that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. No, it was some clever little quantum sitting there going, I think dinosaurs suck. So I'm going to kill them so little wormy, skirmy, little weaselly these little voles and rodents can take over the earth. Because they're so much cooler. Come on.
By hundreds of years of scholarship and philosophical critique and anthropological investigation.
Anthropological investigation has something to do with physics? I'm afraid not. Again, this is just religionizing, physics. Yes, physics has been infiltrated by a lot of phantasmagorical, wishful thinkers, and they've broken it into little teeny pieces. They've broken solid, rational thinking. And they've done it because the icons of physics died, unfortunately. And it's just tragic and sad, but it's just a fact.
This Cartesian Newtonian picture of science as the pursuit of certain knowledge of an independently existing external world.
So again,
without reality, much of reality.
Well, what the hell happened there? Somebody made a mistake. Could it have been me?
Science, a sort of Cartesian or Newtonian understanding of science, and I think it's just been very convincingly proven and shown by hundreds of years of scholarship and philosophical critique and anthropological investigation, and that this Cartesian Newtonian picture of science as the pursuit of certain knowledge of an independently existing external world, it doesn't hold any water.
There you go. So he's saying for the last 200 years that's happened. That's exactly the opposite has happened. We've discovered the truth. Ben Franklin did it with his little kite. Okay, Newton did it with his apples and his other bullshit. Einstein did it with his math. So no, I'm sorry. We're resolving the truth. There's not some dispute here. You're saying because somebody can refine a theory and add some sort of extra to it. Darwin didn't really explain the exact dynamics of much of evolution. he certainly didn't know about DNA molecules. He didn't have that advantage to think of it in that terms, but he didn't go really into it in the sense that he hadn't come to the understanding that maybe most or all evolution is a byproduct of punctuated equilibrium, or small populations do all the evolving and then they come back to haunt, in a sense, the original population. So for like wildebeest, for example, to evolve, one aberrant wildebeest in a sea of wildebeest, his DNA will get swallowed up. So if one is born, let's say, with eyeglasses, that the eyeglass trait will, even if it makes him more successful, will likely just get swallowed up and diluted by the mere mass of numbers, of the competing DNA. But if he goes off by himself as a small group and then acquires that attribute, he will grow with that attribute. It will become successful in an environment, and then it's like the Europeans coming back to kill the Native Americans. All we were doing was, in a sense, killing off, coming back to get our revenge on our older design. And that's what evolution does all the time. That's how it does the refining. But I'm just saying that, okay, so that wasn't included in Darwin's theory. But the fact that small population evolution is probably responsible for most of the changing in evolution, the aggressive changes in evolution, and it also explains why there's a lot of fossil missing links are missing. The reason why they're missing is because the evolution took place in small populations, not large populations. It explains a lot. So it's an added detail that would have given his book even more substance. But it doesn't change what he said. It doesn't change most of what was in his book. It wasn't like the whole thing was in error. So this idea that we are not advancing, that we are not gaining much more knowledge than we're losing. Yes, a few facts that we think are correct are incorrect. Okay? But that's a tiny sliver of the growth rate. Most of the growth in our knowledge is solid knowledge, not unsolid knowledge. It will not ever become a fact that it was wrong. The fact that the world is a sphere and not a flat plane will remain a fact forever and ever. There will be no quantum surprise to unravel that. And the fact of our biological evolution is a fact. It will not be changed by any of your hokum pokum wishful thinking. All right? It will not be undone in some future where they'll figure out we didn't evolve. That's not going to happen, Matt.
Anymore. It's not relevant to our current understanding of the universe.
Our current understanding of the universe, which is to be what? That the complexity is hidden inside quantum particles. And so even though 99.99999999999% of all the observable universe is crude chemistry doing very crude processes, okay? There's nothing incredibly complicated happening on Mars, or even a planet that looks complicated like Jupiter. The only thing that's complicated is like weather, but weather's very mechanical. So it's all regular. The spot goes around and around and around. It doesn't do any dancing. It doesn't do any, hey, how are you? There's not a smiley face on it some days. I mean, all the complexity in the universe is here. Biology creates complexity. Evolution creates complexity. Okay? In an extremely and dramatically and incredibly, accelerated proportions to what chemistry left on its own can do, without a process of evolution, without a competition to force the acquisition of tools, there will be no complexity. It will just remain elementary chemistry, and that's what most of the universe is. It's just a bunch of rocks and minerals, and there's just nothing. What, stalagmite, stalactite swirl in a weather system? This is the real universe. That's the real magic of the universe. The biology evolving on the surface of Earth isn't the universe. No, the universe is doing something special. No, all the special shit is right here, Matt. And that's all. And it's just complexity. That's the extent of the specialness, is that it's just complexity. And when you break it all down, it's just consumption, reproduction, ends up being cannibalism on an island based on addiction.
The universe is not made up of independently subsisting things in empty space and homogeneous time.
Says you. I don't think you can demonstrate that with any drawing or physics or anything. Nothing. Nothing explicit. No theory, no formula, no real hard piece of evidence whatsoever will you be able to demonstrate that the universe isn't exactly that. Even Feynman, I think a guy you have some respect for, said he believes that as you go deeper, you'll find a checkerboard. You'll find a simpler system, not a more complex system.
The universe is a growing energy event, a complexifying.
Again, the universe is not doing any of that. The only time you get this complexity, all right, is when you create a process that forces it, all right, and forces it in this environment, this special environment, where you have an evolving molecule, an evolving blueprint. With just plain evolution, okay, if you took the first living life forms, you couldn't get here from there until it became a blueprint. Until the molecule became a blueprint, you couldn't get expedited evolution, because you couldn't create the competitions in at enough scale with enough diversity to produce this result. And it's only, it's just like the fact of sexual reproduction and how that created more monstrosities. The whole point of sexual reproduction was just the fact that it creates more monstrosities. It creates more things that are not copies, that are flawed copies, more error code, to create more monsters for the competition. And so you need something that copies imperfectly, which is more aberrant and more unlikely a circumstance than something that would copy identically. Ironically, you would think the perfect copy machine for us is the harder one to make, but that's for us. Okay, in the physics, in the chemistry, the harder copying machine to make is the one that makes small mistakes, confined mistakes.
Venture that, as far as we can tell, has been going on for 13 or 14 billion years, but really what we've recognized with.
And what does it matter? So let's say it's 13 billion years, but let's say we don't have an explanation for the beginning. Let's say there was lots of beginnings. Let's say it's an oscillating universe. Let's say there is a forever into the past where matter still exists forever. What does that tell us? Matter has been around forever, and yet there is no fingerprint of a God. There's no sound from a God. There's no words from a God. And there's certainly no God written in our psychology or a God written in our biology. There's nothing graceful or clean and logical and rational about any part of our construct outside of the mandate of playing the carnage game, play the gladiator game. We are clearly made, to be bots in the war, and that's it. The war over surviving DNA molecule, king of the DNA molecule pile of corpses.
Everything we've learned about the universe in the last century is that it's not a dead object.
That's just a silly word, right? So this is where the language is broken, right? Because now the word dead doesn't refer to something ceasing to be alive, and alive is being, we know what alive means is that you have a sustainable biosystem within yourself. You're a closed system, and it's sustainable. It's maintaining its integrity. The organs are alive, the tissues are alive, the functionality exists. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's doing what it did the day before. And when it ceases to do that, then it's dead. Okay? He's claiming that the universe is alive, that it's doing that functionality, that it has arranged organs, that it has arranged structure, intended somehow to maintain itself. that it's somehow walking through the universe and surviving in the universe. The universe is living in a universe and it's surviving in the universe. What? Yeah, no. And if you were to take this model that the universe is some bigger biological organism, then what are we? Are we an organ in this biological organism? Are we its heart or its liver? Is there any possible way to see how we are at all functional to this function of this universe at all? There's no way to see any functionality whatsoever. Any contribution or all the consciousness we could generate forever and ever and ever, somehow how that lubricates the universe in some way. You know, our moaning and our crying and our loving and our wanting. How does any of these expressions of my consciousness do a damn thing to that universe? Yeah, there's no sign of that. There's no evidence of that. It's completely incoherent and incredible. This is an incredible conversation to be having. You're claiming, it's like me claiming the earth is flat. There's no evidence, and yet you claim it. And I'm supposed to disprove it with what? But just the counter fact that, no, here's the theory, Matt. Okay, it's matter. Matter creates energy. It's energy. Energy creates relationship. And those relationships evolve into circumstantial complexity. But none of it functions for any purpose.
It's a creative
So the universe is creative now. It's not. The biology is creative. It's designed to be creative. We are designed to create ways of navigating the world we live in. We are designed to come up with some strategy to get from here to tomorrow without getting eaten by something or killed by something. And to do it in a way where we stay comfortable and we maintain the integrity of our flesh and all our blood doesn't spill out. That's the extent of the intent of our creativity. Our creativity has no other function but then to maintain this DNA molecule.
Form. And this is where I think I also agree with Dose Booth that we need to begin to take seriously an organic rather than the old mechanistic paradigm.
Right. What does that mean to you? Does that mean anything? Organic is now somehow not mechanistic. So does that make sense to you? That there's not a mechanisms to how potatoes grow? That there's not mechanisms to the fact that biology evolves into patterns? That there always seems to be this pattern of creating the herd animal and the predator, that it's duplicated. It's not an accident that you have cheetahs in South America and leopards in Africa, even though they're kind of distant relatives. That you had this same kind of predation with the marsupials in Australia. The same kind of relationships exist. The kangaroos are the grazers, and then there were predators that fed upon them.
To understand what natural science is really telling us about the quantum and relativistic and evolutionary nature of our universe is
the quantum relativistic and what do you call the other thing? Evolutionary nature of the universe? No. Sorry, no sale. Let me try that again.
And natural science is really telling us about the quantum and relativistic and evolutionary nature of our universe is that it's organic. It's
self-organic, right? Yeah, it's self-organizing. It's spilled beans. I mean, if you could spill beans, and if you spill them down a staircase, they'll be filtered one way. If the stairs are all tilted a little, they're all rounded a little, and you spill the beans down the middle, by the time you get to the end, they'll be filtered. Does that mean it's self-organizing, the system, or does it just mean that that's what's going to happen when you have physical rules, and then you apply time to those rules? This is what you'll get. You'll get a filtered result.
Organizing. It's alive. and that its behavior...
Again, there's no point in having the word alive if this is what's going to happen to the word alive. That now you can apply the word alive not to a robot that seems to mimic the living thing, but now you can apply it to a universe that has absolutely no appearance of having anything in common with a living thing. Nothing in common whatsoever. Galaxies have nothing in common with a living thing. Nothing. They're not living by any rational definition of alive. They're not alive.
Are not deterministic, because if we look at the history of the universe, we can see that there are various emergent events which have taken place that could not have been predicted beforehand.
Says you. Emergent events that could not have been predicted beforehand. What events are those? With what science beforehand? With a caveman's understanding of science? Yes, a caveman could not have predicted the creation of elements in the nuclear furnaces of suns. Yeah, this is true. Cavemen probably couldn't predict that. But Einstein probably could have.
And that, based on that history, we must assume that in the future there will emerge new forms of organization that we never could have foreseen.
Well, then why doesn't it exist? It's had billions of years to exist. It hasn't shown itself anywhere. It hasn't popped up on any of the planets anywhere near us, or any of the asteroids, or the meteors, or the dust in this room isn't doing anything. None of this stuff. There's times the speed of light times the speed of light squared amounts of stuff here, and none of it's doing anything interesting except for fucking me. I'm the only thing fucking interesting in this whole fucking house, and you could blow up the galaxy. You could blow up the whole fucking galaxy with the energy in this room. And yet none of this shit is doing anything interesting.
Certainly after the fact, we can give some causal account. We can list a whole set of reasons why this was made possible.
Yeah, exactly. We can do the simple thing of looking back and saying, well, here's the evolution of the combustion engine. We can show exactly how it happened. We can go airplanes. We can go right back to Wright brothers and stuff. We can follow the trail right back to how you put it together, and we can see what put us together. Okay, a swamp. We're swamp thing. All right, you can still see that the primary function is this GI tract, okay, with little reproductive organs tied to it. And that's the primary mechanism. That's the guts that are more important than any other guts in the body. That's the thing that DNA is most concerned about.
But we couldn't have seen it coming. So, one of the words that Gary thinks we need to sort of erase from our language is spontaneity, because he doesn't think it's consistent with our physical, rational understanding of the world. But, you may not like quantum physics, but that doesn't change the fact that it is the most successful scientific field that human beings have yet stumbled upon.
That's just a lie. Who made up that statement? Where does that statement come from? Okay, it comes out of your mouth, it comes out of Piro's mouth, like some sort of religious crap. Jesus is the way. Somehow quantum solved all of our problems. Bull fucking shit. Okay, I mean, I worked doing experiments and stuff, and that's how we learn stuff, is that we try things. We experiment. All right. Again, quantum did not land us on the fucking moon. Quantum mechanics has done nothing. If we never came up with quantum mechanics, it would have changed nothing. All right. You'd still have a car. You'd still have computers. You'd have it all if we never realized that you could do this weird, bizarre math to figure out what a photon will do in a certain circumstance. It adds absolutely nothing to our capacity to invent. Nothing. Not one single freaking invention is dependent on quantum mechanics. So don't tell me it's the most successful anything. It's a pile of useless crap. if you're going to connect it to religious theory and say God is making photons go through 2 slits at once. It's not happening, Matt. It's crap. You can believe it if you want, like all the other nonsense you believe, but it's crap. And someday I'm going to write that on your damn grave, or I'm going to pay some 16-year-old kid. I'll give him an endowment. All right, so someday he can write, it's crap, Matt, because it's crap. And someday that's going to be proven. It's not a phantasmagorical event. It's a physical phenomenon. It's happening for a reason. It is not spontaneous. It is not magical. It is not driven by random spontaneous forces or any of that crap. Feynman didn't believe that. You're just talking shit. This whole idea, the most proven, the most substantial, the most greatest science in the world. No, bullshit. It invented nothing. It's created nothing. It's made nothing.
Where success is measured by its ability to predict with a fine...
Predict what? It can't predict shit! That's exactly what it's saying, is everything's fucking unpredictable. It's saying it can't tell which slit it went through. It can't predict whether the photon will go there, or there, or there, or there, or there. It predicts nothing. Absolutely nothing. So don't tell me it's the most predictive. It's the most unpredictive. It's just basically saying, we can't figure it out. When we can, if we tried. But instead, we keep making preposterous experiments that'll just sit there and create aberrant results. Instead of doing systematic, thoughtful, intelligent experiments, they just keep trying to figure out some way to prove there's a God. They keep trying to find some way to load the dice so they can claim that there's something controlling the universe. And all you're doing is weighting the dice. You're just tricking the eye. You're just playing magic tricks on perception and calling it science. You're shoving doves up your sleeve and then telling me you made them.
And degree of accuracy, the behavior of some isolated field of nature.
Right, and Newton predicted the results by doing experiments. He didn't need quantum mechanics. He didn't need wacky theories. He just needed to do the experiments and see the results and say, look, this is what happens when light's shined on glass at a certain frequency. And it will, this percentage, do this, this, and this. And once he knew that, he doesn't need quantum mechanics to predict results now. He doesn't need quantum mechanics to say, well, look, what would happen if I double the thickness of the glass and cut the wavelength of the light in half? Well, I'd probably get 4 times the number of bars. Okay, yeah, he could have figured that out. People were playing with prisms and light long before quantum mechanics was invented. You don't need it to understand there's a relationship.
Quantum physics works, and what we can say is...
For what, again? Prove it. Prove it. Prove it. Prove it. Prove that it was quantum physics and not experimentation that works.
About it is that it shows that at the most fundamental level, the universe is a spontaneously...
There you go. It somehow quantum theory. So creating some bizarre, abstract, idiotic experiment where you shine light a long distance through a tiny hole, and then at another distance have 2 slits, okay, and then at another distance have a target, and that somehow you've proven, okay, that the universe is spontaneous because you shine randomly generated light, okay, not directional, into a box, have it bounce all over the place, and sometimes go through that little hole you left. So some of the light that goes through the hole could theoretically be a week old. It's just been bouncing around inside the box until it pops out the hole. But whatever, let's just say it could have an extremely aberrant course to actually getting to the hole. So you have lights generated at different times, in different ways, at different angles, shining through a hole, and then aimed at 2 slits that have been designed explicitly to be very close together and very narrow to maximize what? The effect of the walls on the photons as they go by. So, yeah, so you've maximized the experiment to create the maximum influence, the maximum amount of interference with the photons without destroying them, and then you're surprised that the result on the target appears filtered. And that's supposed to prove to me they're spontaneous in the universe. Because you get a filtered result when you do an experiment explicitly designed to create a filtered result, somehow you've proved spontaneous. You're satisfied that's a proof. That's the extent of your intellectual demand from a statement. You don't demand any more credibility or proof or substantiation to draw a conclusion than that. So as long as magicians can shove doves up their sleeve, magicians can create birds. Right?
Emergent creative field where everything is connected to everything else, and where each moment is...
Well, you just claimed spontaneous, so how can everything be connected to everything else if there's things that aren't connected to anything that come out of nowhere and do something to something? So in a sense, you're proposing two completely contrary theories of functionality. I mean, either it is everything causes everything, or it's anything can cause anything. Which is it?
A sort of actualization of novelty.
Novelty. So again, it's novel. Weather systems are novel. They're not consistent. They're not cause and effect. They're not mechanically constrained by laws and forces. They're novel. They're not novel. Again, a stupid word. A word of no use. They're novelty. What is this? This is not a useful, constructive, defined, useful word. It's a mushy, silly, abstract, useless, rubbish word. It only has value if you're trying to prove the earth flat. It has no value in a rational world, just like astrology.
Rhythmic pulsation that with each repetition creatively differentiates itself from the repetition just prior.
Creatively differentiates itself. I mean, again, what is this? These are useful sentences of compound words. Usefully differentiates itself. So because something does something, it's now useful and it's differentiated.
Where, if we were going to try to have some, it makes the idea of having some objective description of this process as though it were just things in external space and homogeneous, linear time. It makes that whole model seem irrelevant, like a child.
Okay, so he's belittling the idea. So if you believe in evolution, this guy's telling you you're wrong. Okay, that whole idea of cause and effect and an evolutionary chain of existence, that all your ancestors were just better swimmers and better fighters and, they lived to breed, that's not true. Okay, they didn't have a fight or a fair fight, and they didn't conquer something, and they didn't fight it. They didn't do the tooth and claw thing for billions of years or millions of years. No, that's all a lie. Okay, there was a magic quantum that said you win, you lose. Because I like you better. You're going to be cooler. Your ancestors are going to kick ass. Some quantum knew ahead of time, predicted ahead of time, okay, that you were going to be so cool that your ancestor should win. So your ancestor, the magic fairy, made your ancestor lizard win in the fight over the, turkey legs, and they cheated so you could win, so you could be so cool, and you wouldn't be stupid loser, because you would have been a stupid loser if the other lizard won.
Oh, play toy or something. what we've learned scientifically is that we're inside of the process that we're trying to describe, and that as a result,
totally irrelevant. Really, it's totally irrelevant. The fact that we're made out of the process is irrelevant to our capacity to observe the process. We can be a machine and we can understand how machines are made. We make machines all the time because we understand systems and we understand design, and we're just a system and a design. Now it's a little too complex for us to make a sentient brain in a machine shop, but that's only because we have a limited amount of knowledge. We can't